All right. So the topic for today is migration. Migration in cloud. That's what we are going to discuss. And the focus is to discuss how do we migrate in Google Cloud. So our source could be any. So when it comes to the migration, we basically talk about source and we talk about destination. Now, when we talk about source, your source could be a physical on-premise data center, and that physical on-premise data center contains physical servers. It may contain virtual machines. If it contains virtual machines, then those virtual machines are typically VMware based, Hyper-V based, or Citrix based, any virtualization platform. That's what physical machines are. So either you have physical servers or virtual machines in an on-premises data center. Guys, uh, while I'm continuing with the session, while I'm explaining, I will not be able to see who's there in the lobby. So please make sure if you find somebody in the lobby, go ahead and admit that person. Okay. So so when it comes to the source, we have physical on-premises data center, which includes physical servers, virtual machines, and the other source could be now this physical on-premises data center, there could be private cloud also. When it comes to private cloud is nothing but also a physical on-premises data center, which has certain deployments based on a private cloud technology. And within that deployment, application and workloads are accessible to the internal resources of that company for which private cloud is built. So that's private cloud also. Then comes public cloud. Source could be public cloud also. When I say public cloud, it could be Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud Platform, Alibaba, Oracle, IBM, etc. It could be any public cloud. So these are my sources. When it comes to destination, keeping in consideration today's topic, our destination is Google Cloud Platform. So we want to understand how do we migrate from various sources to Google Cloud Platform as a destination. And migration is a vast topic. Obviously, you cannot cover it in a couple of minutes or in a couple of hours. It takes a couple of days to get expertise on the entire migration life cycle. So I will try to keep it at a very high level so that I am able to cover the most important pointers so that you get the fair idea or the basic idea of how the migration process happens in Google Cloud, or how do you migrate from a source to Google Cloud as a destination. That's what the objective of this session is. So our source is going to be one of the public cloud. We don't have access to an on-premises data center. We don't have virtualization platform access. So what we are going to choose Microsoft Azure as source. So we will have some virtual machines and applications hosted in Microsoft Azure. We will migrate them to Google Cloud. So destination is going to be the Google Cloud. And then comes the third thing, which is migration tool. Now, when it comes to migration tool, there are multiple migration tools that have, those are available. So we have cloud native tools and we have third parties. We also call them third party or ISV tool stack. So we have third party tools also available. When it comes to cloud native tools, if you specifically talk about the leading cloud service providers, Microsoft Azure has a tool with the name Azure Migrate. Using this tool or solution or service, you can migrate applications and workloads from various on-premises and other cloud platforms to Microsoft Azure. Similarly, in AWS, you have a service with the name Server Migration Service. Using this service, you can migrate virtual machines and physical servers to AWS Cloud. In Google Cloud, the service that we use for migration is known as Migrate to Virtual Machines. In short, we call it M2VM. That's the service that we use in Google Cloud. Then comes the third-party solutions. There are many. So you have PlateSpin, Zerto, VMware, uh, so I just don't remember Cloud Endure. So Cloud Endure is also a solution that we use in AWS, and we also use Cloud Endure as a enterprise solution also. So there are many solutions basically using which you can do the migration from various sources to destination, and they can include on-premises and cloud as well. So these are my migration tools. So these are the three main pointers that you need to understand: the source, destination, and the migration tool. Then comes, so this is just the theoretical aspects of the fundamental that you need to understand before we get into the demonstration of migration. Now, after this, what you need to understand is the migration phase. When it comes to the migration phase, if you want to put it at a very high level, if you want to understand the migration journey, though migration is a complex topic, at the same time, there's a separate team that takes care of the migration. It is not the operation teams who will be, uh, handling end-to-end migration services or migration initiatives. Sometimes, depending on the size, scale, and complexity of an organization, you may have the same team handling both assessment, migration, operations, and optimization, including audit. And in some organizations, they have separate team dedicated for each initiative. So when it comes to the migration phase, if you want to put it at a very high level, 50,000 feet from the ground, it comprises of three stages. First is assess, second is migrate, and third is optimize. So any migration project starts with the assessment. Assessment basically means identifying the lay of the land, understanding what are you going to migrate, how does the environment look like, what is the operating system, whether they are Windows, Linux, Mac, AIX, how many applications are there, bifurcation of applications, how many of them are mission critical, medium critical, low critical, bifurcation from the environment perspective: production, non-production, staging, test, QA, dev. Understanding from the department perspective, which application belongs to which department. That all comes into the assessment phase. You want to understand what you are going to migrate so that you have a clear visibility on your source. And for assessment, we also have a set of tools that we use. Most of the cloud service providers, they have native solutions for assessment. Similarly, you have third-party solutions also available using which you can perform the assessment. So assessment basically tells you, out of, let's say there are 1,000 workloads, 1,000 servers, which includes physical servers and virtual machines at a customer premises, and you want to migrate them to the cloud. Now the assessment will tell you what percentage of that 1,000 server is can be migrated to cloud, is compatible to run in cloud. What percentage can be migrated with some little or no adjustments, remediations, and what percentage cannot be migrated at all. That's what assessment phase will tell you. So you will have a clear idea what are you going to migrate. That phase will also help you to create a collection of servers or create a group of servers or virtual machines or applications that you want to migrate. So you cannot migrate all 1,000 virtual machines in one go. You will probably bifurcate them from the application perspective. That okay, out of 1,000 servers, we have a total of 125 applications running on them. And then you will also perform dependency mapping, application dependency mapping, to understand which application depends, or which application depends on how many components, or what all servers comprise an application. That's what application dependency mapping is. So it's a lengthy process that we basically undertake when we perform an assessment for a client, depending on the size, scale, and complexity of their environment. Then comes migrate. Migrate basically means that once you are done with your assessment phase, once you have a transparent and clear cut idea of what is your migration scope, how many servers you're going to migrate, in what schedule, what will be their migration schedule, how many servers will go in one migration phase. That's where you begin with the migration. Now, before the migration also, there are multiple types of migration. So we have 6 hours of migration that we talk about. Now, when I say 6 hours of migration, it basically means that there are 6 types of migration methodologies that we use. Now, the most common, most popular migration methodology is lift and shift. Lift and shift is also known as rehost. What lift and shift basically means, it basically means that you migrate a server from source to destination without making any changes to it. Changes with respect to the operating system, changes with respect to the applications which are installed. So you're not making any changes, you're just picking it up and dumping it to the target, to your destination. That's what lift and shift and rehost is. Now, it doesn't look good that you are picking up virtual machines from on premises and putting them into the cloud, or from source to destination. It doesn't involve modernization. However, that is the most important, or the most widely used universal migration method that we use. And after the virtual machines and applications and workloads are migrated into the cloud, then we talk about modernizing them. Then we look at application modernization, or try to make them more cloud native as much as possible. So the first is lift and shift, which basically means you migrate a virtual machine from on-premises to cloud, or from source to destination, without making any changes to it. That's lift and shift or rehost. Then comes re-platform, re-architecture, repurchase, retain, and retire. These are the 6 phases of migration. So lift and shift. Second is re-platform. Re-platform basically means that you are doing migration, but you're not migrating as is. You are, while migrating, making some modernization. So probably your operating system is running Windows Server 2012 R2. While you migrate, you are migrating it into Windows Server 2016. Or your application is running, you're using Oracle database, and at the time of migration, you switch from Oracle to SQL Server, SQL databases, and vice versa. So you're changing the platform basically. You're using .NET, you're probably changing it to Java based. That's what replatforming is all about. Obviously, this will require some additional efforts, and it will also require collaboration from multiple teams at the same time. It may require more downtime as compared to the previous approach, which is rehost or lift and shift. Then comes re-architecture. Re-architecture basically means changing the architecture of the workload or application. Let's say uh, migrating a monolithic application into microservices. So the application is monolithic, which means it is a combination of web app and DB. It's a 3-tier application, a front end, a middle tier, and a back end tier, which is a database. And now you are migrating it in the form of microservices. So you break a monolithic application into multiple microservices, create a module around it, and migrate it into the cloud. And instead of putting that into on the top of a virtual machine or a server, you basically containerize it. Instead of using virtual machine, you're using Kubernetes. You're using containers. and you're using Kubernetes to orchestrate and manage those containers. That's what re-architecture is all about. Then comes repurchase. Repurchase basically means, let's say I'm using an application at on premises, which helps me to manage my customer relationship, or which helps me to manage my operations in terms of incident change, release, rollback management, problem management. Instead of migrating that application into the cloud, I may probably purchase a SaaS solution like PMC Remedy, ServiceNow, Microsoft Dynamics, Oracle, Hyperion. That's what repurchase is. So repurchase is a great approach for applications which are legacy in nature, for applications that require heavy lifting in terms of building the infrastructure, and an alternate solution in the form of SaaS is already made available by a service provider. You can go for repurchase. Then comes retain. Retain basically means anything that you can't migrate. So during the assessment phase, you will have visibility what you cannot migrate. Probably because it is running on a legacy operating system. Let's say there is a server which is running Windows Server 2008 Service Pack 1 or 2003 server operating system, or Red Hat version 4 or SUSE version 8, a legacy operating system that is not supported in cloud. So obviously you can't migrate it. The other the other use case could be security. You have a mission critical application. You don't want to migrate it because cloud probably doesn't support the compliance, or you have reservations whether or not you will be able to meet the security or regulatory compliances that you need to adhere to in cloud. So you probably want to retain it running on premises and then in the end retire. When you perform the migration project, sometimes you come across certain applications or virtual machines or servers which are actually not used anymore, or which are not required in near future, probably a couple of months from now. So there is no point of migrating them in the cloud, unnecessarily putting in efforts, investing capital into migrating them into the cloud and then retiring it from there. So sometimes we also retain those applications or workloads which we do not see a near future use. So we retain them at on premises and then eventually we retire them, or we replace them with repurchase with an advanced or latest application or workload. So those are the 6 R's of migration. So when it comes to migration, 90% of the customers go with the first approach, which is lift and shift and rehost. Because while migration, they don't want to bring in any modernization because they think it would unnecessarily extend the migration timeline, migration project, and it may cause some commercial issues as well. So they may have those reservations in mind. It may have commercial implications. It may have a lot of downtime involved that they don't want to grant at the beginning, or they probably are not sure about cloud at this moment. So they don't want to make much efforts in migrating to the cloud. First, they want to get into the cloud, evaluate cloud for its performance and availability, for its cost optimization matrices, for the advancement that it brings on the table, for the value proposition that it brings on the table. And then in the long run, they probably would want to go with modernization by thinking of replatforming, re-architecture. That's how they do it. So that's the migrate. And then comes optimize. Optimize basically means once you are in the cloud, it doesn't mean that the story is over. The journey is over. That is where the journey starts. It's a circle, which means after you are in the cloud, you will need to make efforts to ensure optimizing the services so that you can enhance the end user experience by enhancing the performance, by making your operations more efficient as ever, by reducing the cost, which is the ultimate goal of moving into the cloud. Probably because 90% of the customers, when they move into the cloud, they have two goals in mind: either cost, that they will be able to reduce the cost, or state-of-the-art technologies or the latest advancements in technologies that is available in cloud in the form of AI, ML, IoT, big data. That's what they think of. Or right now we're talking about open AI a lot. So that's what they think of while they move into the cloud. So you need to make sure that you keep optimizing it. And that is where every organization have processes in place wherein they have continuous optimization process. So once in a month, once in a quarter, once in twice a year, they run optimization initiatives wherein they see what all they can do to enhance the end user experience, improve the availability and performance of workloads and applications, and also reduce the cost wheresoever possible. That's what optimizing. So that's about migration phase at a very high level, which comprises of assessment, migration, and optimization. Any questions so far?
Yeah, no questions. Okay.
Let's move on. All right. So once you have clear idea on the migration phase, assessment, migration, and optimize, let's move on to specific to Google Cloud. Let's understand how it happens in Google Cloud. So Google Cloud never had a native migration tool. They acquired a tool. They acquired a company with the name Velostrata. So they acquired a tool, Velostrata, and they white labeled it and they changed its name and made it Migrate for Compute Engine. So they changed the name of Velostrata and they changed it to Migrate for Compute Engine. However, this tool had a lot of challenges. Challenges with respect to integration, with respect to configuration, with respect to managing the UI, or the issues are there with the UI also. I'm saying when I talk about configuration challenges, the tool would require you to create an IPsec VPN tunnel between source and target, between any source that you have and the target is Google Cloud. Now, sometimes you don't want to do migration over a VPN because when you do migration over a VPN, it unnecessarily extends the migration timeline. VPN would always have limited bandwidth. So migration timeline will extend because the when you copy data over a VPN versus over the internet, there's a huge difference. Now, internet brings some security issues also for which migration tools are capable and they have the capability to tackle it. So Velostrata or Migrate for Compute Engine had a lot of challenges, integration challenges with respect to configuration of firewall rules, configuration of clear line of sight with respect to network configuration, IPsec VPN tunnel creation, with respect to granting certain rules and access. And then in the UI, there were synchronization issues. So a lot of issues were there, and that's where Google upgraded that product, and Google came up with a new product, which we today know as Migrate to Virtual Machine, which is the latest offering from Google Cloud. And I've tested this product. So far, it has met my expectations. In fact, I'm using this project for one of the enterprise migration project for one of the customer that I'm currently supporting for migration of their mission critical applications to Google Cloud, which includes ERP solutions like SAP HANA, which includes middleware solutions like Informatica, which includes some internal applications. So the customer comes from an industry vertical where they have critical applications which they are currently migrating to Google Cloud, and they are using Migrate to Virtual Machine. And I have not yet come across any issue with the product, with some little here and there deviations is always there, but so far so good. The product has met the expectations. So the product is Migrate to Virtual Machine. Let's understand the migration lifecycle in Google's language real quick. So when it comes to first of all, let's understand this product. So this is the product page. where it basically talks about, it says that it's migrate to virtual machines. It's fast, flexible, and safe migration of virtual machines to Google Cloud. The migration is frictionless, enterprise grade migration, which basically means that you can migrate any application, any workload to Google Cloud. It's fast and efficient. It's simple. Say the UI, the user interface is user friendly. It doesn't contain much configuration that you need to do, and requires minimal downtime and risk. Obviously, this is one of the expectation from a migration solution, that migration should require a minimum or no downtime. Now, no downtime migration cannot happen. So there will be a downtime, but that downtime has to be as low as possible. And the other expectation is that the migration must not involve any data loss. When you migrate from source to destination, you should not lose data. You should not, get your applications or your workload compromised. So the consistency has to be there. There should be very minimal or no data loss and minimal or no downtime. That's the another expectation from a migration solution, which is translated into recovery time objective and recovery point objective. So this tool involves, I'm saying this tool provides minimal downtime with minimal risk. And it's lower cost, higher staff productivity, which is true. If you go to a third-party solution like Plateskin, Zerto, VMware, Carbonite, they involve a lot of cost. However, cloud native solutions, they are available at 1/10 of the cost that you would pay for a third-party migration solution. And cloud native solution integrates well with the cloud. They understand the cloud, and it is easier to migrate to cloud with these solutions. So it involves lower cost, higher staff productivity. That's what this solution is all about. Let's understand the architecture of this solution, which is very important for you need to understand the architecture. This is the architecture of the solution. If you look carefully, as we speak, this solution supports VMware. If it's an on-premises environment, on-premises data center, then it only supports VMware as we speak. So if you have Hyper-V based virtual machines, if you have physical servers, you cannot migrate them using this solution. For that, you might want to look beyond this solution and look for a third-party solution. Then when you talk about cloud, it supports AWS cloud, it supports Azure cloud. So target is GCP in itself, so it supports the other two leading cloud service providers. It doesn't support Alibaba, Oracle, IBM, and other public cloud service providers as we speak. The product is in its initial phases, so very soon it will definitely add more support to other platforms also. So you will see this product supporting Hyper-V, which is Microsoft-based virtualization technology, in next couple of months. And similarly, they will add Oracle and IBM also to their support matrix. So both Hyper-V, Oracle, and IBM is there in the roadmap. And as per the unofficial communication from Google, they will have them, I'm saying, integrated into the solution probably by the end of this year, by the end of 2024. That's the unofficial, information that I've received from Google. This is what the product supports as we speak. So VMware on-premises, AWS cloud, and Azure cloud. Now, how it is doing the migration? The migration is over the internet. It doesn't require you to set up any IPsec VPN tunnel. It doesn't require any VPN tunnel. And that is the beauty of this product. It uses it does the migration over the internet. However, since internet also involves risk with respect to confidentiality, integrity, and availability breach of your data, that is where the migration is secure. It uses a secure channel, which is port 443, secure socket layer, to do the migration. So any data that it copies from on-premises is encrypted, both at rest as well as in transit. And it does the migration for on-premises. For AWS and Azure, it uses APIs. So you will have APIs available that Google Cloud uses. Those APIs will be granted access to AWS and Azure Cloud. And then with the help of APIs, which is again secure APIs, HTTPS, it will be able to replicate data to Google Cloud. And then that data will be converted into virtual machines. So you can migrate into virtual machines. So that's what it uses. So that's the high level architecture of this solution. Then you see target project and host project. It uses a concept of host project and target project. Host project is the project which contains the solution, and host project can also be a target project. It doesn't mean that you will need a minimum of 2 projects in Google Cloud. No, you can go with the same project. In the same project, you can have service enabled, service configured, and in the same project, you can have virtual machines migrated. Or if you have multiple projects in Google Cloud where you want to do the migration, then you can add them as a target project and you can select them while creating the migration configuration. So that's at a very high level, the architecture of this solution. Any question on this architecture? Yes, no, maybe?
No, no questions, Dr. All good.
All right, silence is half consent. Let's move on. All right. Now, before we get into the solution configuration, let's understand another thing which is very important is the operating system support. You cannot migrate everything, all the operating systems. So you will need to be aware of the support matrix also, that what all operating system versions it supports. So migrate to virtual machines as we speak. As I said, it only supports VMware, AWS, and Azure. And there is another option, which is the manual approach, which is manually importing an image from source and then converting that image into a virtual machine at target. But I would not call that a migration. It's more of a manual effort, manually moving VMs from source to destination. Migration means automation. The process has to be automated. The process must not involve heavy lifting in terms of configuration. It should do its job automatically in the backend, and it would require very minimal configuration and involvement from end user. That's what a migration is all about. So when it comes to Azure, because Azure is what we are focusing. So when it comes to Azure and AWS, you will find that both, I'm saying for VMware also, the operating system support is similar. If depending on the operating system version, you can see here, if it is Azure, if you're using CentOS, then these are the versions of CentOS which is supported. For Debian, this is the version which is supported. Red Hat 7.9 is supported. 7.9 and above is supported. Prior to 7.9, nothing is supported here. Rocky Linux / Ubuntu. And then when it comes to Windows Server, it supports 2016, 2019, 2022. So it doesn't support 2012, 2008, 2003. However, you have some operating system with migration support only. I'm saying this table provides list of operating system versions which are fully supported. Fully supported basically means that you will not have to compromise on configurations at Google Cloud, at Target. However, you can also migrate these versions. It says operating systems with migration support only. It basically means that these operating systems have already reached their end of life. End of life basically means that the OEM, the object, the equipment manufacturer for, let's say, Windows Server, it is Microsoft. Microsoft is not providing any updates, any security patches for this operating system. For example, here, Server 2008 and 2012 R2, because they are already end of life. So when you migrate them to Google Cloud, you will be able to migrate them to Google Cloud. However, Google will not be responsible for the updates, for the security patches. And that is why it says that operating system with migration support only. But for these operating systems, you will continuously get support from Google Cloud when things do not go as expected. That's the difference. So even though 2003 server is not supported here, 2008 R2 and above is supported, right? Now, when you migrate from Azure to GCP or from on-premises to cloud, licensing is very important to understand. That how are you migrating? Are you paying for the services? Will you be able to bring your own license, export your licenses to cloud? Yes, Google Cloud supports both. So Google Cloud supports pay as you go. Pay as you go basically means you don't have a license. Google will add the license cost into the service cost. Bring your own license basically means that you already have license for these server operating systems, whether it's Linux or Windows. So Google will remove the license cost and they will only charge you for the compute cost. That's what licensing is all about. Then Google supports BitLocker encryption. So if you have devices configured with BitLocker encryption, Google supports it. So this is about the operating system support that you need to be aware of. It should not happen that you promise your customer that yes, we can migrate this application without even inquiring on what Windows or Linux server operating system it runs on. Never ever do that. Otherwise, you will be in trouble. So this support matrix is very important when it comes to migration project. All right, then comes some best practices. Now, since you have not seen this product in action, it would not make sense to talk about best practices at this moment. So I will share this URL with you. After we are done with today's session, you can probably go back to the session recording, or you can refer to this URL and read about the best practices of this solution, that what all best practices are available here. So that's the best practices for this solution, that how do you configure this solution, keeping in consideration the best practices which are laid down by Google or industry experts for migrations across source to destination, or for migrations from on-premises to Google Cloud or from another cloud to Google Cloud. That's the best practices which are available. Okay. Last but not the least is the migration process. So when it comes to migration process from this solution, migrate to virtual machine, this image can explain the same. So these are the migration phases. It starts with onboarding. Onboarding basically means that once you are done with configuring the solution, then you will need to select the machine that you want to migrate. So configuring the solution basically means integrating or communicating or connecting with the source. So you will start to see your source data into the solution, into the UI of this product, migrate to virtual machine, and then you need to pick and choose the machines that you want to migrate. That's what onboarding is. After you select the machine, it goes into the next step, which is the replication. Replication basically means copying all the data from that machine, which includes machine configuration, which includes all the disk on that machine and all the data which are stored in the disk. So it will copy everything, which is known as replication or initial synchronization or initial seeding. It will copy, replicate the data from source VM to Google Cloud. And that data replication is a continuous process that takes place in the backend until the final cutover or you delete the migration, which basically means once you onboard a machine, it will not happen that you do the migration the very next moment. You will probably onboard it today and let the synchronization run for a couple of days, and then you will decide on the migration. Because migration would require downtimes, you cannot do that during business hours or weekdays. You will probably do it over the weekend. And 99% of the cases, migration projects, they run over the weekend. So you will have replication enabled during the weekdays, but the actual migration will take place over the weekend. So your application will continue to run throughout the week, and it would not affect your source. It would not affect it would not interrupt the source. Your applications, your servers, your machines will continue to run as it is. Migration service will not impact. It would not cause system utilization also. It would not unnecessarily eat all CPU and memory from the application or server which will impact your actual production environment. It doesn't do that. That's what replication is. Set the VM target details. Target details basically means that once you onboard the VM, once you start the replication, over the weekend when you want to do the migration, at the target you need to provide the information. You need to configure the target configuration in terms of where exactly in Google Cloud, which region, which VPC my service will get migrated to, which firewall policy it will adhere to. All that is known as target details. So you will configure the target details accordingly. Now, before you do the actual migration, it is always suggested to perform a test failover, which in Google terminology is known as test clone. Test clone basically means that you will create a clone of your source into the target environment, connect to the clone, validate. If you have everything, all the data as expected, if you see everything, there is no data loss. And once you are sure of the performance and availability of data, then you will decide to do the actual cutover. Actual cutover means the actual migration. So the actual migration you can always do over the weekend, and test clone you can do anytime because test clone will not affect the source. It doesn't affect or interrupt the source. It just creates a replica of it. It is like it will create a copy of source at the destination so that you can do your testing. And cutover basically means it will now shut down the source, perform the final replication of data, and then it will create the machine at the target, which is exactly the replica of source. And you connect to that machine, you validate that everything is as expected, and then you continue with that machine at the target, make necessary changes to redirect your application, connection strings or end user requests to the target deployments, target environment, and then you can plan to decommission the source environment because that is of no use anymore. That's what cutover is. In the end, finalize, which means any cleanup that you need to do as part of the migration, you will do the cleanup. So that's the migration process in a nutshell from Google Cloud perspective. And I've already talked about the migration process, general migration process at a very high level. So that's the migration process that Google Cloud uses. So this document talks about the stages, all the stages of the migration. So this is it. Let's go ahead and see the migration in action. Obviously, we will not be able to configure everything in this session. I have done some configurations beforehand. So I'll show you that configurations. Some configurations I will do right in front of this session so that you will understand the process. So I have created a presentation here, a couple of slides, which contains step-by-step process to configure the solution, to perform the initial replication or to onboard the VMs, onboard the source, perform the replication, and then do a cloning or a cutover. That's what is concluded here. So here you can see migrate Azure to virtual machines. Now I have also shown you the process that we would use when it used to be migrate for compute engine. This was the process that we would use. Now we don't use this process anymore because this capability is now deprecated with effect from April this year. Now all new customers, I'm saying any existing customer who is using this capability is a different story altogether. They can continue to use for next couple of months until Google completely terminates this product. But for new customers, this product is not available. It is now migrate to virtual machines. So migrate for compute engine is not available. And here you can see this requires a lot of configuration. So this product is a bit lengthy. It is not user friendly and it contains a lot of synchronization and consistency issues. That's what led Google to enhance the product, address those shortcomings, and come up with the latest and updated version with the new name, which is Migrate to Virtual Machine. So this is Migrate to Virtual Machine. How it works, so using this service, we are going to migrate our Azure environment, Azure virtual machines to Google Cloud. So we consider Azure as source and Google Cloud as target. So let me show you my Azure environment. So my Azure environment comprises of 3 virtual machines. And if you look carefully, these virtual machines are configured across regions. So one virtual machine with the name test VM, it is configured in East US. There is another virtual machine with the name Windows 2K16, which is a 2016 server operating system from Microsoft Windows, and 2019 server operating system from Microsoft Windows, and they are configured in West Europe. So I have 3 virtual machines, one in East US and 2 in West Europe. Now you just need to understand the process. The process will remain the same whether there are 3 virtual machines or 30,000 virtual machines. The process will remain the same. There is no change in the process. So I've got these 3 virtual machines in Azure. Azure is my source and Google Cloud is my target. So let's understand the high level steps. So my first step, which is more of a prerequisite in this, is identify the host project. As I said, we have 2 types of project here, host project and target project. Host project basically means this is the same concept of shared VPC, wherein you have a host VPC and then you have guest VPCs or client VPCs or child VPCs, whatever you call it. So we will need to identify a project in Google Cloud where we will be configuring the service and a project where the migration will happen. That's what identify the host and target project is all about. So when it comes to Google Cloud, I'm already logged into Google Cloud here. And in the Google Cloud, my project is, the name of my project is Nice. This is the project where I will be migrating. In my Google Cloud training, when I was talking about in the initial days, I talked about resource hierarchy in Google Cloud. And if you remember that session, I talked about project, which is a container to host Google Cloud services, which is attached to a billing account so that Google can bill you for the services and resources that you consume. That's what project is all about. So project is similar to subscription in Microsoft Azure. In the subscription, you also create resources and those resources are built as per the subscription. So I've got a project that I've identified as my host project, which I will use to configure the service and to also migrate the virtual machines or workloads from on-premises. So that's what my target environment is or my host project is. So it says identify the host project. Next is install the Google Cloud CLI. Now, all the cloud service providers, they have a CLI solution available. AWS has a CLI, Azure has a CLI, Google Cloud also has a CLI, which is known as G Cloud CLI. So you need to install the CLI on your local system because with the help of CLI, you will do certain configurations. Now, you can also do those configurations manually, but if you do that manually, it will take a lot of time. So it is rather recommended and advisable to use CLI. So you can install CLI from here. You can click on this URL. It will take you to this page where you will select the architecture of your machine. For example, I'm using a Windows 10 laptop. I'll select Windows and I can directly download the CLI installer from here. So I can download the installer and then I can install it. So I have already downloaded and installed the Google Cloud CLI, which is here. So I can open command prompt with elevated privileges. So this is my command prompt with elevated privileges. Now CLI doesn't have a separate UI. In the command prompt, you use CLI. So Google Cloud CLI is already installed here. Once you install the CLI, you will need to configure the CLI also. It is not that you will only install the CLI, you will need to configure the CLI. So how do you configure the CLI? You basically need to update the CLI so that it will have all the required components available, which is the command here, gcloud components update. So it will update the gcloud CLI with the latest libraries, latest information which is available. And once that part is done, then you will need to authenticate. That's very important. you will need to authenticate using CLI. This is similar to AWS CLI, wherein you provide your IAM user and password to authenticate. So you need to authenticate. So first you need to update the components and then you need to authenticate. So for authenticate, you can type this command in the CLI, which is gcloud auth login. When you type this command, it will open a browser and it will ask you to provide credentials of your account, the account with which you are going to perform the service configuration. So migrate to virtual machine service, we are going to configure, and the account that we will use here must have access, must have appropriate privileges. So this is the account that I'm using and my account has privileges. So I will allow this SDK to have access to my account. It says you are now authenticated with Google Cloud CLI. So I can close this browser window and I can go back and I can see here it says your browser has been opened to visit this site. You are now logged in as this user and this is your project. So it shows me my project also. This is my project ID. This is the project ID with which I'm logged in. Give me a moment, guys. All right, guys. So you can see I already have a project configured. However, if I want to change the project, if I don't want this project, I want to change the project, I can also change it. So in order to change the project, you will just need to type this command to change the project. So the command to change the project is here, which is gcloud config set project, and then you need to put the project ID. So let's say I want to configure I want to configure the service in a different project. I will type gcloud config set project and then the project ID. So since I want to configure it in the same project, I can type 428. I'm saying the project ID that I can capture from the project page and hit enter. So after you hit enter, it will basically configure that project. It says updated properties of the core project. So it has taken into consideration. Now this project is going to be used for configuration of the migrate to virtual machine service. So that's my next step. After this, after I'm done with this, in this project, I will need to enable some APIs for migrate to virtual machine service to work properly. And those API information is available here. These are the APIs that you need to enable, which is VM migration API, service management API, service control API, IAM API, cloud resource manager API, and compute API. These are the APIs that you need to enable. How do you enable these APIs? It is very simple. All you need to do, you just need to type this command, which is gcloud service enable, and then you need to type the API's name with a space in between, no comma, it's a space in between. Just copy this command, put it into the command prompt, hit enter. It will enable these APIs if not already enabled. If they are enabled, it will just tell you that, okay, I'm done, I'm finished, I'm done, enabling it. And if they are not enabled, it will enable it. So it says that it is finished successfully. So we have enabled the API. This was the reason we downloaded gcloud service, so that we can select the default project for configuration of migration service, and we can enable the respective APIs. So we are done with this step. Now, roles are very important. As I said, the user who is doing all of this configuration must have a minimum of this permission. So in a production environment, we always go with least privilege principle, which basically means granting least privilege permission to an identity so that identity can deliver his or her job role and functionality. So if you want somebody to configure the migration service, either the person should have editor or owner rights on the project, which you may not want to give at times because you follow least privilege principle. In that case, you can grant that identity a minimum of VM migration admin role. So VM migration administrator role is needed for users so that they can create a new migrate to virtual machine source and perform all other migration operations. This is administrator. If you have team members who will monitor the migration service, because you are migrating thousands of virtual machines, so you will need somebody to monitor the service around the clock, to look at the configuration and alert whenever things do not go as expected. Then you can grant them the viewer role, which is VM migration viewer role. So with this role, they will be able to retrieve information about the service. They will be able to perform migrations, but they will not be able to do any configuration. They can do the migration, but not the initial configuration. So these are the two roles which are very important. And if you want your users in the organization to be able to view information about a migration, but should not be able to do any configuration changes, then you should need to assign them VM migration viewer role. So these are the two roles which are available from IAM perspective. Okay. So this is the initial prerequisite that we need to take care of it. So we have installed the CLI, we have enabled the services. We'll move on to the next, which is install the migrate connector. Now, this is applicable in case of VMware. If you are using a VMware based source, then you will install the migrate connector, which is nothing but a small utility that you will deploy on one of the ESX hosts and configure it so that it can communicate with a vCenter and it is able to discover all the source virtual machines, and then you can pick and choose what you want to migrate, what you don't want to migrate. So we'll skip this step because our focus or our source is Microsoft Azure. So when it comes to Azure, you will need to configure these steps, which is register an app, register your app, create a custom role, assign the custom role to an app, and create an Azure source in GCP console. This is what you need to do. So when it comes to the Azure configuration, understand how the service is communicating with Azure, and then you will understand these concepts. Uh, so this is Azure. This is your GCP. And in GCP, you have this service, which is migrate to virtual machine. Now, this service in GCP needs to communicate with Azure. So if you already have knowledge of Microsoft Azure, how access works in Microsoft Azure, there are multiple ways. You can create an identity in Azure, which basically means if it's a human being who needs access to Azure, you can either create a member account for the human, or you can invite that human as a guest to your Microsoft Azure subscription or Entra ID tenant. And then you can add roles or RBAC to that identity, and they will have access to your Azure subscription and resources. However, if that identity is an application, migrate to virtual machine is an application. How do you grant an application access to Azure is via app registration, which is similar to user account and groups via app registration. So what you basically do, you create an app registration, you assign that app registration appropriate access, and then you provide app registration details, or you configure app registration details into the service here. That's how you configure the service. So we'll create an app registration and we'll provide the details. How do we do it? For that, I will log into a different account so that I can show you the process end to end. Give me a moment. I'm logging into the service. All right, so I'm logged into my Microsoft Azure portal. I'll show you the process of how do you enable communication between Google Cloud Migrate to Virtual Machine Service and Azure Cloud. So in Microsoft Azure, we can click on app, we can search for app registration like this. That will take us to this window where you see the applications. Click on new registration, and here you need to type the name of the application. So I can say testing GCP migration as the service name, just for the purpose of recognizing it in future, and create this application. So after the application is created, you just need to capture some details from that application that will help you to configure the authentication. So in the application, I will navigate to manage certificates and secrets, which is similar to username and password. I will create a secret here, provide secret a name. I can provide the same name, which is testing GCP migration. Select the expiration date of it. I'll select the minimum, which is 3 months, and add it. Now this will generate the credentials. This credential is very important, which is client value, because you can only see this credential right now. Once you navigate away from the screen, this credential will not be visible anymore. You will need to delete it or recreate it. So I will copy it because this is equivalent to a password, and I'll put that into a notepad. So I have copied it here in a notepad, and I will need it during the configuration. So I've created my application, app registration, which is here. There are many, so I need to search for it, which is here, testing GCP migration. Now this app registration, this app will basically require certain access, certain level of access, so that when I attach this app to migrate to virtual machine service in Google Cloud service that migrate to virtual machine service will be able to communicate with Microsoft Azure subscription, with this subscription, and be able to read the virtual machine data, be able to create some configurations. For example, it should be able to create a snapshot. It should be able to read the virtual machine configuration. It should be able to copy the data. So it would require some privileges. Now, in a POC environment, what we typically do, we grant highest level of privileges to make it quicker. I can directly grant this application testing GCP migration a contributor level access, which is the N-1 or the highest -1 level of access. After owner, it is contributor. But for a production environment, I will not recommend doing it. For a production environment, I would recommend following least privilege principle. And that basically means you will need to grant the minimum privileges to Google Cloud Migration Service on your source environment, so that the service will not interrupt your source environment. And for that, you will need to create a custom role. So we'll go ahead and create a custom role here. I'll navigate to my subscriptions. In the subscription IAM, there is an option to create a custom role. So I'll create a custom role here, and that custom role will have least privileges that the service needs. So I can put this role as custom role, or you don't want to put this information, directly come to start from JSON. Now Google Cloud provides you a JSON file also with the least privilege that you need to configure. So let me show you that. On this documentation you get here. So this is the custom role which is available. Create a custom role, and this contains the permissions that the service needs. So the service needs write access on resource group so that it can create a snapshot and put that into the same resource group. it needs read access, it needs delete access, so that it can delete the resource group when the application, when the application is completed. It needs read access on virtual machine, write access on virtual machine. It needs the capability to deallocate virtual machine, so that during the cutover, if you want the service to be able to delete everything from source, it can do that. It needs read access on disk, and it needs the access on snapshot also, because the service will not directly copy data from the virtual machine to interrupt the virtual machine process. It would rather create a snapshot of the virtual machine disk and then replicate the snapshot to the destination, which is Google Cloud. That's how this service works. So it needs these many actions, and they are the least privileged action or least privileged access that the service needs. So all you need to do, you just need to use this JSON. So this JSON is something that you need to use. So you can copy this entire script into a notepad. Like this. And in the notepad, you just need to replace the subscription ID. So navigate to your Azure project. I'm saying Azure subscription. For example, I'm configuring this subscription. So I'll copy the subscription ID from here, and I will replace it here. So I put the subscription ID. I will save this notepad as, I will say, custom role dot JSON. That's it. So I save it. Now I'll navigate to create a custom role. Provide a role name. Custom role for migrate to virtual machine service. Start from JSON, select a file. I'll put the file here, custom role, and you see the file here. It will automatically change the name because the file contains the name of the code contains the name of the file also. That's it. Go next. You can see all the services are listed, all the actions are listed. Next, and just create this role. So you need to create a custom role. So now that the custom role is created, after the custom role is created, you will need to assign that role some access. So let's go and assign the access. So we'll click on add role assignments. We'll select the role from here. I can say MV2M. Minimum. Here's the role, minimum M2M permission role. I'll select the role. Then I'll select my application that I have created. So I will assign this role to my application that I've created. I'll put the application role, GCP, no, Migrate. You need to type the exact role of the application, otherwise you will not be able to search for it. I need to go a step back. No, that's not the real. So this is the application name, which is testing GCP migration. So I'll navigate to the subscription. Now this is where I am going to assign that custom role to this application. Add custom role. Sorry. Custom role is already created. I'm going to assign the access. So I'll go to add role assignment. Select the role, which is minimum. And then select the member, which is the application, which is testing GCP migration, and assign the role. So I've assigned the role. So I've created an application, created a custom role, assigned that application the custom role. That's what I have done so far. Okay. Now the next step is so this part is done. Azure part is done. You've created the required configuration in Azure, which is nothing but an application that you've created. Now you will need to configure your compute engine, migrate to virtual machine service. So for that, you navigate to the Google Cloud Console once again. So we'll navigate to the console. Over here, this is the console for Google Cloud. Here in the search, I can search for migrate to virtual machine service. Here's the service. Now this service will work. It is enabled. This is how the service looks like. Since this service, I've configured this service to show you the demonstration because replication takes time. So the first thing that you will do, you will click on add a source. You will need to add a source over here, and you will see the options like add VMware source, as AWS source, add Azure source. So what you will do, you will click on add Azure source, and you will need to provide all of this information so that migrate to virtual machine service can communicate with your source environment, which is Microsoft Azure. So you need to provide the name. So I can say M2VM, migrate to virtual machine. Next one, you need to select GCP region, the region in which you will do the migration. You can only select one region at a time. If you want to do the migration in multiple regions of Google Cloud, you will need to add source multiple times, or you will need to do this configuration multiple times. So let's say my source is Asia East 1, that I will be putting everything into Asia East. Then you need to select Azure location also, which basically means if in Microsoft Azure you have virtual machines configured across regions, for each region, you will need to do this configuration again. So I will select my Azure region, let's say as West Europe. Because in West Europe, I've got a couple of virtual machines. Then I need to put my subscription ID for Azure. So subscription ID I can get from Azure portal. This is the subscription ID. I will copy it from here, put it here. Then I need client ID. Now this client ID, tenant ID, I will need to get from the application that I created. So I'll navigate to my app registration. This is the purpose I created that application. So here's the application. I will copy the information from here. It needs client ID. Here's the client ID. So I'll copy this and put it here. Then it needs tenant ID. Tenant ID is your Microsoft Entra ID tenant ID. So I'll provide the tenant ID. So I provided the tenant ID. Then it needs client secret value. So I'll navigate to the secret value, certificates and secrets, and you will notice here I cannot see it anymore. This is not visible. There is no way I can see it now. So to be on safer side, I copied it on the notepad. I'll copy it from the notepad and I'll put it here. I'll check it if it is right. Yes. So I provided all of this information. So what will happen? Migrate to virtual machine service will use this information to communicate with Microsoft Azure. And when it communicates with Microsoft Azure, that communication will be API based. So it will use APIs to communicate with Microsoft Azure And how it reaches to your subscription? It will reach to your subscription with this information. So it will first look for this tenant ID. So it goes to Microsoft and says, I need to communicate with this tenant ID. Microsoft will check and say, okay, this tenant ID exists. It will move on to the next step. Next step is which subscription in the tenant. That information is available here. So then it will reach to that subscription. After that, it needs authentication so that it can read the data from that subscription. For that, it will use client ID and client secret value. Consider this client ID and client secret value as username and password. So it will use these two pieces of information to authenticate and authorize with Microsoft Azure. Now, with this information in place, Migrate to Virtual Machine Service is able to communicate, is able to establish a connection with Microsoft Azure, and it is able to see all the virtual machines which are in West Europe, because you have configured West Europe here. So it will be able to see all the virtual machines in West Europe. Next, encryption. When you migrate those virtual machines to Google Cloud, definitely you need encryption at rest so that the virtual machine disk is encrypted. For that, you can use Google Cloud Managed Encryption keys, or you can use Cloud KMS also. Similar to Azure Key Vault, you have Cloud KMS here. You can also use your on-premises encryption keys. If you have on-premises hardware security module, you can configure Cloud KMS to import the encryption keys into Cloud KMS, and then you can use those keys here. To make it simple, I will go with the default option. Then comes use tag for migration resources. This is very important. As part of this configuration, as I said, migrate to virtual machine service will create some resources in Azure. And if you want to if you want to get to the billing, you want to know what all this service is costing me, or if there are multiple resources and you want to see which resource is created by this service, you can use tag here. So I can put a tag which is origin, and I can put it value as migrate to virtual machine. So any resource that this service will create in Azure will have this tag. And by looking at this tag, I would always know, okay, this resource was created by Google Cloud Migrate to Virtual Machine Service. And when the job is done, this resource will be auto deleted by that service. So I don't need to bother about it. It's a temporary resource in my account. So I'll just hit create. Now, when you hit create after providing all of this information, Google Cloud or Migrate to Virtual Machine Service will tries to establish a communication with Microsoft Azure by passing on all of this information in the form of an API call. If all of this information is correct, if the application whose credentials you are providing, which is client ID and secret, has appropriate access on Microsoft Azure subscription, in next couple of minutes, it will start to show you the virtual machines which are in West Europe, because you've selected West Europe as location. So right now the status says is pending. Pending basically means it is right now trying to communicate, establish connection, which takes a minimum of 10 to 15 minutes as per Google documentation. Sometimes it takes more time. So we will not wait for it. We will move on to the next step, wherein I already have added Google Cloud here. So you can see I already have added two sources here. My first source is Migrate to Virtual Machine POC. And in this source, I have added US East as my source in Microsoft Azure, where I already see my virtual machine, which is test VM here. So my test VM is shown. And if you want to see that in Microsoft Azure, you can see that here. In Microsoft Azure, if you navigate to Virtual Machines tab, this is this account I don't need anymore. So I'll close this account. I'll go to other account where this virtual machine exists. So you can see here, test VM is already here. So for this test VM is in East US. This is running standard V2MS. And if I navigate to Migrate to Virtual Machine Service, I find it here, test VM. The resource group is GCP POC, 2 CPUs, 8 GB, 1 disk, Windows standard V2MS. It is here. So this is how you basically see it. So once that Once that source is added, you will be able to see it here. So very soon in next couple of minutes, you will see the status changing as active. However, you will not see any VM because in that subscription, I don't have a VM. So we'll come back to the POC part here. Now here I've got my VM. So how do I configure? What is my next step? Now that I have my VM listed. So this is what I already have configured here, West Europe. And you can see those two servers from West Europe are listed here. Windows 2016 and 2019 from West Europe are listed in my service in Google Cloud. So what is my next step? My next step is to onboard them for migration. If you remember from presentation, the steps that it uses basically. So the first step was onboard. Select the VMs to migrate. So now I will select my VM that I want to migrate. Let's say I want to migrate. Now you can migrate one VM or you can migrate multiple VMs at a time. Some applications will comprise of one or two VMs. Some application will comprise of multiple VMs. So if you want to migrate multiple VMs at a time, you just need to select all of those VMs at once. Let's say one application comprises of 20 VMs. You can select all those 20 VMs from here, from this list, and then you can click on Add Migration. So click on Add Migration, then you see two options. You want to migrate the entire VM or you want to migrate the disk. Sometimes in some scenarios, we don't migrate the entire VM, we migrate the disk so that we can create VMs as per our own configurations, as per our own environment. So we are going to migrate the VMs here, not the disk. So we select VM migration, and this is how we can add it to the migration. As soon as you will add the VMs to migration, you will start the VM replication status as ready. Now this status basically means that you can proceed with replicating these VMs in Google Cloud. That's what this means. So after you add the VM to migration, you will navigate to the migration VM migration tab. And in this tab, you will start to see the VMs here. So these two VMs we have just added, which is 2016 and 2019, I start to see them here. The replication status says ready. So I will now select both the VMs. I will click on migration and I will start the replication. So when I start the replication, what will happen? The service will navigate to these two VMs at source, will create a snapshot of the VM disk. And once that snapshot is created, it will start to replicate the data from the snapshot to Google Cloud so that the source VM is not getting impacted. And since you are doing it for the first time, this will be known as first sync. First sync basically means initial replication. And in this replication, it will replicate the entire data. If the VM contains terabytes of data, it will replicate the entire data. So the time that it will take to complete the first sync is directly proportional to the amount of data which is there on the VM. Now, in our case, those two VMs are plain VMs. They don't have any data on it. There is no data on these two VMs. They are just plain VMs with no configuration, only operating system files, because I have not put any data. Even though, since they are containing Windows 2016 and 2019 operating system, the number of files, I'm saying the amount of data should be in GBs. At least 10, 12 GBs of operating system files are there on the VM. So they are getting replicated. So what the service, Google Cloud Service is doing, it is creating a snapshot now. It will create a snapshot of these two VMs. So you can see it has started creating the snapshots here. You can see the time also, which is today's time and 6:01. 1 minute past 6, which is exactly a minute ago. So exactly a minute ago, it has created two snapshots. Now, first it will create these two snapshots and then it will copy the snapshots. And in this manner, it is not interrupting with the actual VM, so that any application which is running on the VM will continue to run without any interruption. No resource utilization will be there. And you already know the concept of snapshots. So this is how it takes care of the replication. So it will create the snapshot. Once these snapshots are created, it will copy the snapshots to Google Cloud, right? That's what this service is doing. And since it is doing it for the first time, it will take time. If you want to see the status of it, you can click on any of the VM name and it will take you to the properties of the VM. And here you can see replication history. In the replication history, you can see all the replications of this VM. Since the initial replication is currently going on, you can see here data. Progress is also shown here. Right now, you see the step which is replicating. Start time just now. Progress is out of total 10 GB of data in the root drive, C drive, almost 3 GB has been replicated. So that's how initial replication is happening. You can see the replication history. Right now, you will not see anything for this VM, but for the other VM, you will be able to see which is already replicated. For example, this test VM, which is already replicated. If you navigate to the properties of it, you will see the replication. Under replication history, you will see the replication time here. So you can see the initial replication started today, and then it took almost 16 minutes to replicate. And after that, every 15 minutes, 20 minutes, it was doing the additional replications. So you can also configure the replication frequency. By default, the frequency is 2 hours. Every 2 hours, it does the replication. However, when it does the next replication, it will not do the entire copy. It will create a snapshot. However, it will only copy the delta changes in the VM. So when the initial replication is complete, any changes that happens in the interim before the second replication happens, it will only copy those changes using the change tracking method, which is the delta changes. That's the concept that it uses in the backend. So let's validate a couple of things. If we go to the source, by now, the source that we have added, that should be available now, which is the next term. Let's see the status of it. It still says pending. Probably it will take some more time to complete. And we have already enabled the replication for the VMs, which is here. So now these two VMs right now is the initial sync is going. So once this initial sync is complete, the status would change like this. Let's move on to the next step now. The status of the VM will change to this, which will say active. Replication status active. Once it says replication status active over here, it basically means that now you are ready to perform the failover. You can either do a test failover or you can do a full-fledged migration. As per the best practice, you should do a test failover first and then do the full-fledged migration. You can do both. But before you do that, how you will need to tell Google Cloud that when I do the failover, when I do the migration, the VM should get provisioned in that region. Region is already defined. It should get provisioned in that VPC, in that subnetwork, in that with that configuration, with that CPU memory and all that. You need to provide that detail because Google machine offerings and Azure machine offerings are different. And this service doesn't have capability to translate a specific size of Azure machine to the respective size of Google Cloud. That is not available. So you will need to configure the target also. So let's configure, while this initial sync is happening, we can configure the target for both the VMs, for both Europe VMs. So we'll select both the VMs together. You can configure the target for one VM at a time. You can configure the target for multiple VMs in one go. So if all the VMs belongs to the same application, you can select them all and you can click on edit target detail. Here you will provide the target. So target first starts with, it says multiple VM selected, then the project. First you will select the project. Now here you will see the project that you have already added, authenticated through CLI, G-Cloud CLI. So since I've authenticated this project, I'll see this project here. Then it will ask me the zone. Since I have selected Europe as my target region, it shows me all the availability zones in Europe. I can select the zone where I want these VMs to get hosted in. If I want to put some labels, labels are similar to tags. I can put that here. Next, is machine configuration. What size I want for these machines. So I can select the series. I can select the size for these machines. Just for the demonstration, I will just go with the minimum size, which is 2 CPU, 2 GB RAM. Then management. When Google is doing some management, what it should do. So when host is getting managed, I want my VM to get migrated to a healthy host in Google Cloud, and it should not automatic restart. This is a typical virtual machine configuration in Google Cloud. When you create a compute engine instance in Google Cloud from compute engine UI, you do the same configuration. You basically configure the same. Then comes networking. Here you will select which network you want these VMs to get in. So I'll select the network. I'll select my subnet in that network. If I want these VMs to have public IP, I will select public IP information, add it, and I can select the public IP here for these VMs. So I have selected the public IP for both the VMs, which is ephemeral. Then any network host configuration, I don't want to change it. Otherwise, these VMs, if they are joined to virtual machine Active Directory domain, they will lose the connectivity. That's it. Additional configuration, if you want to provide any service account. So I will go with the default service account, compute engine service account. This type you can select. At source, the virtual machine's disk could be magnetic, it could be SSD based. In Google Cloud, if you need SSD, you can select SSD. If you need balanced, you can select balance. Encryption. Whether you need Google native encryption or cloud KMS, you can select that choice here. Whether you want to go with bring your own license or pay as you go, you can select here. This is all trust based. If you select bring your own license, Google will trust you for this. Google will trust you that you maintain the license. But in the audit, if you don't have a license, Google will penalize you. So I would rather select pay as you go and put the license information later on. That's it. Sole tenancy, any information you want to select, replication policy. Now, by default, the replication policy is 2 hours, which means every 2 hours, it will see if there is any change that has happened in the VM, and it will replicate those changes. If you want it to replicate frequently to minimize the recovery point objective, I said to minimize the data loss, you can change this value. So typically, I will change this value to 900 seconds, which is 15 minutes. I want my replication to happen every 15 minutes. Now, this is not similar to Azure Migrate, where replication is continuous. It runs in near real time. In Google Cloud, you need to manually decide it. If you want it to run in near real time, you can probably say 15 seconds. Now it will run in near real time. Every 15 seconds, it will do it. But this will unnecessarily increase the cost. So the default time frame I would rather say is 15 seconds, which is equivalent to 900, 15 minutes, which is equivalent to 900 seconds. Save it. So this is how you provide the target configuration. Now that you have provided the target configuration, you are ready to proceed with the failover. Test failover, which is cloning, or the actual cutover, which is the actual migration. You can also see that for these two VMs, 2016 and 2019, my replication is also, the initial replication is completed. All 10 GB data is complete. You can see first sync is completed. So I can also replicate, I can also fail over these VMs now. However, since these are plain VMs, I would rather fail over a different VM that contains some data so that you will have the confidence on this service, that this service can actually replicate my source environment to target with minimum or no loss of data, with minimum or no interruption to my source. So I'll navigate to the source once again. My source is Azure as we speak. In Azure, you see the virtual machine, which is test VM. This is a web server actually. This machine is hosting a website, which is a public facing website. Let me show you that website first. So I'll copy the public IP of this machine, put it into the browser, and I see this website, which is a student registration portal. This portal is from one of the university who is offering technical courses, who is inviting interest from students. Students will browse this website. They'll provide their first name, last name. They will select a course of their choice. They'll provide their personal details, and then they'll create an account on this website and submit this information. This information goes to the admission team, who will then connect with students for further steps. So it's a internet facing application. I'll put this IP into the chat window. You all can go ahead and and check whether you're able to access this website. So right now this website is hosted at source VM. Okay, on the source VM, if I connect to the source VM, I see some additional data on the source VM. This is the RDP of source VM. You can validate that this source VM is hosting the website. If you type localhost, you will see the website here. And this source VM also contains some data. I put a notepad here on this source VM that says this Azure VM is hosted in East US and currently hosting a public website. This Azure VM will be migrated to GCP project. Nice. This project it is going to migrate. So I've created this notepad also in this VM. Now I'm going to migrate this VM to Google Cloud. Once the migration is complete, I will connect to the migrated VM in Google Cloud and see whether my notepad is still visible on the VM, whether I have Google Chrome there. Also in Google Chrome, I have added a favorite also here. You can see under bookmarks and list, other bookmarks, I have a folder with the name My Favorites and Yahoo website is there in the My Favorites. So we will also see that when it does the migration, does it retain the favorites from the browser or not? So these two things we are going to validate. I will disconnect from this VM now. And I will navigate to Google Cloud portal, the migrate to virtual machine dashboard. I'll select my VM. Before I hit the test migration or actual migration, I will need to validate one thing, which is the status of replication. The replication status must be active. If it is not inactive, then you will not be able to perform the failover. So since it says active, which means I can go ahead and perform the failover. How do I perform the failover? For this VM also, I've configured the target details already. So I will directly go to cutover and test clone. Here I see two options, test clone and cutover. So I will show you the test clone part, which is the same thing. Test clone and cutover is the same thing. In test clone, it will not interrupt the source VM. However, it will create a replica of it in target and you can test it. And in cutover, it will delete the source VM and then it will create the VM in GCP, the same VM in GCP. So I'm creating a clone here. I'm doing a test failover. My test failover is started. You can see test clone job started. If I want to monitor the status of my failover job, I can click on the VM name. I can click on test clone cutover history. And you can see here at 6:15 today, test clone has started. Right now it is preparing the VM disk. So what it is doing right now, from the snapshot that it has created, it will prepare a disk and using that disk, it will prepare the VM. So this process will take 3 to 5 minutes to get completed. Once this process is complete, we will connect to the VM. We will validate our migrated VM, whether it contains all the applications, whether it contains all the data, whether the website is still accessible to end users. And once we validate all of it, once we are 100% sure, then we will do the actual migration, which would delete the source VM and create it in Google Cloud. So testing is very important before you do the actual migration. Actual migration and testing is the same thing. There is no difference in the configuration. While this is getting done, I'm open to questions if you have any, guys.
So does it include data disk and OS disk also?
It includes everything. That's what you have configured here. See, when you have selected your source, remember when you initiated the replication, this is where you've selected it. So when you add it to the migration, at the time of adding to the migration, it asks you whether you want to go with disk migration or VM migration. If you select VM migration, then it by default includes all the disk from the VM. By default, it includes. And if you want to see what all disks are included here, for this VM, this is the OS disk which is included here. For these additional 2 VMs, since these VMs are with OS disk only, you can see those disks here.
Okay.
So you can include all the disk, you can include some of the disk also. But obviously, OS disk is mandatory. It cannot happen that you select VM migration and you do not select the OS disk. No. If you only want to include the data disk, then select the disk replication, not the VM replication. All right. So let's move on to the status.
Okay.
Let's see what is my status for test failover. Great. So test failover succeeded. You can see here how much time did it take. At 6:15 it started, and at 6:17 it succeeded. It only took 2 minutes to do the migration. 2 minutes. So even if you need to take a downtime, 2 minutes plus additional 5-10 minutes for the validation and handover to the operations team. That's what you can think of. Now I'll navigate to compute module and see whether my machine is available. Great. So my machine is here. Test VM. You can see this is configured in US East. Here's the internal IP. Here's the external IP. And I have this VM here. So my failover is successful. Now the next thing is to do the validation. Validation whether this machine exactly contains the same data which was there at source, whether there is any data loss or not. So for that, I will need to connect to this machine. So first, I will take remote of this machine. For that, I can copy the public IP, open remote desktop connection application on my system, paste it here, hit connect. Great, I'm getting the connection prompt, which means the VM is available. I can put the credentials. Now you will use the same credentials that the VM had in Azure, because in GCP you have not selected any credential. So you will put the same credential of the VM that you configured in Azure while you provisioned this VM and connect to it. So I'm connecting to the VM. All right, I'm connected to the VM. Now you can see it shows that the VM was restarted. Yes, because this VM is built from the snapshot. So that's the reason it says that the VM was restarted. This is a expected screen that you will get here. So you just click OK, close the server manager, and then see you have your Google Chrome and you have this notepad also. Let's open the notepad. Great. We have the data. So my data is intact. Let's look at browser favorites. If my browser favorites are available. So I'll go to Google Chrome, navigate to the bookmarks and list, navigate to other bookmarks. Great. My favorites is there and Yahoo is there in my favorite site. So it has preserved the favorites also. That's the second thing. Third thing to check is this VM was a web server. It used to host a website. So let's check whether that website is still available. I'll type localhost. Great. I'm able to browse the website locally. But that website was a public website. So I'll come out of the VM, copy this public IP. This is the public IP that I have, and put that into the browser to check whether I'm able to access the website here or not. Now, I may not be able to access the website if I have not configured the firewall rules in Google Chrome. See, in Azure, you have NSGs. In Google Chrome, you have firewall rules. Since I had already configured the firewall rule as per my added target configuration, but if you have not configured it, then you need to configure the firewall rule, which is to allow port 80 or 443 from internet to this IP address or via network tag. So I have a network tag with the name web server, which I allocated to this VM in the added target configuration, which you see here. Over here, you can see the tag, network tag, which is here, web server. So in the firewall of this VPC, this VM is hosted in this VPC, which is Raghuveer-VPC. In the firewall of this VPC, I have created an inbound rule allowing traffic on port 80 from internet to the target as this network tag, which is web server. That is why I'm able to access the website at target also. I'll put that into the chat window. You all can try from your system and you will see you are able to access this website also. So this completes my migration. This is how you do the migration in Google Cloud from source to destination from scratch. So to summarize, we have created the initial prerequisites at both sides, which is in Azure side. We have identified a subscription. We have created a custom app. We have created an app registration. We have created a custom role. We have assigned that role to the app, and then the app credentials we have configured in Google Cloud at the add source. And then we have identified the VMs that we wanted to migrate. And for those VMs that we wanted to migrate, we've configured the target details. And from the Migrate to Compute Engine UI, we can manage the entire show. So here, look at the dashboard. The dashboard shows you all migrations. Right now, 3 VMs are added for migration. You can manage the source. You can see source is added, target is added, permissions are added. All things are here. 3 sources are available. You can create a group also. You can combine VMs into a group and you can migrate them together, or you can directly double or select all the VMs and do it. All those information you see here. All migrations 3. If you want to see VM migration, it shows you VM migrations. You can see the migration programs. All things you can see here. These are the 3 VMs which are there. If you go to the source, you see all the sources here that you have added. All the information is available. In fact, the source that we have added for next turn, you can see the status of that source is active now. As I said, it takes 15 to 20 minutes. Sometimes it takes more time. But if all the configuration is correct, your status will come as active, which basically means that this application, this migration application now have access to that Azure source. And it doesn't show any VM right now. Why? Because in that Azure subscription, I don't have any VM in that region. That's the reason no VM is shown. And for that, you have other regions, other sources as configured where you see the VMs also. So this is the entire migration in Google Cloud that you want to understand, that I could have explained in last 2 hours to the best of my capability, keeping in consideration the time frame as well as the capabilities of the product and the prerequisites. Now, the more you practice, when you have access to this, when you have access to a Google Cloud project, when you have appropriate permissions added to your principal, and when you simultaneously have access to an Azure subscription, you can also build this entire experience yourself. So get a free trial in Azure, get a free trial in Google Cloud, build this entire experience for yourself, test it from scratch. Start from the very first step of taking prerequisites into consideration, configuring the prerequisites, making sure, configuring all of it, and, doing the onboarding part, then replication, set VM target details, test clone, cutover, all that you can do. And then in the finalize. So let's look at the finalize step. The finalize step is that migrate to virtual machine service doesn't have capability to remove anything from target, which is Google Cloud. So if you want to remove anything from the target, the best part about this service is that this is part of compute engine itself. So you just go to VM instances and you need to delete any VM, any virtual machine resource that was created as part of testing. You need to delete it manually from target. But from source, if this would have been a production migration, obviously you would want to retain this VM here and delete the source one. So the service has the capability to delete the source VM because it has appropriate access to it. So that's what this service does. This is the capability of the service that you need to be aware of. This service is far more refined, efficient, updated, as its predecessor, which is Migrate for Compute Engine. And this service does not require heavy configuration. In last 2 hours, I have configured this service from scratch and shown you everything except the replication part. I'm saying you've seen the replication part also. You've seen the entire part, replication, onboarding, configuring the source. So this is how this service works. I'm open to questions if you have any questions, guys.